Tonight, Britain's urgent call for a coalition of the willing to defend Ukraine.
We are at a crossroads in history today.
Europe's plan for peace needs the U.S. too, but will they agree after this?
You're gambling with World War III.
And where Canada could fit in. More mixed messages on tariffs.
Exactly what they are. We're going to leave that for the president to negotiate.
Canada braces for a Tuesday deadline.
We will have a strong, unequivocal, and proportional response.
As the White House hints, Trump may not fully follow through. U.S. Canada tensions take center stage in standout.
Guys, we have a bigger war happening with America. Can you just get along with fucking for a second?
Canadian comic Sugar Sammy on the most patriotic audiences he's ever had.
Now it feels like we're actually standing on guard against them.
In the Sunday interview.
From CBC News, this is The National with Ian Hennemanson.
European leaders are uniting tonight behind Ukraine after a meeting in London that included the Ukrainian president as well as Canada's Prime Minister. The leaders emerging with a plan to forge a coalition of the willing to defend Europe and guarantee Ukraine's security against Russia, including with boots on the ground. The British Prime Minister summed up the mood with the words, "We are at a crossroads in history." After that shocking Oval Office exchange between Zelensky and Donald Trump on Friday, Fed fears the U.S. is tilting towards Moscow. This summit proposed rearming Europe, and in a sharp contrast to Washington, backing Ukraine. As Tom Perry explains, in London there was a sense of urgency as politics across the Atlantic rapidly shift.
A hastily called summit at what Britain's Prime Minister calls a pivotal moment.
We are at a crossroads in history today. This is not a moment for more talk. It's time to act.
Keir Starmer urging European nations and others to form a coalition of the willing to further support Ukraine's defense, work toward an end to fighting and a just peace with Russia, and guarantee Ukraine's security against any future attack.
The UK is prepared to back this with boots on the ground and planes in the air. Together with others, Europe must do the heavy lifting.
Starmer says that heavy lifting will require U.S. backing. He was in Washington this week, trying to bring Donald Trump, who has been moving his country away from Europe, back on board. But that was before the disastrous meeting on Friday, in which Trump and his Vice President JD Vance berated Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky and accused him of showing insufficient gratitude for U.S. military support.
You're gambling with World War III.
Zelensky was at the London summit and spoke with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Trudeau wouldn't criticize Trump or Vance, but says Zelensky made a strong point.
That Vladimir Putin is a liar and a criminal and cannot be trusted to keep his word in any way, shape, or form.
Despite the angry blow-up, Zelensky remains hopeful he can repair relations with the U.S. I think our relations with the U.S. will continue, Zelensky says, adding he's still open to a deal with Trump on Ukraine's natural resources. But Ian, European governments are now looking at the United States and deciding that it's time for them to start counting more on each other.
Tom, Keir Starmer is talking about this coalition of the willing. What do we know about who's involved?
Well, we're hearing reports that Britain and France are proposing a one-month partial ceasefire in Ukraine. This would be in the air and at sea, though not at ground. This comes from an interview with Emmanuel Macron, the French president, in the French newspaper Le Figaro. Now, as for Keir Starmer and this coalition of the willing, it's unclear what role Canada might play in that. Justin Trudeau today was non-committal, saying that's really a decision for a future government.
Tom Perry in London. Outside the meeting, Ukrainians in London made their voices heard. Briar Stewart spoke to some of them about the future of a war that has become even more precarious and uncertain.
Across from Downing Street, hundreds of Ukrainians gathered on Sunday, a weekly rally drawing a much larger crowd because of the widening rift between the U.S. and Ukraine.
Crazy situation.
Natalia Korobenko fled Kyiv more than 2 years ago and admits she feels more worried about the prospects for peace.
I am not very optimistic for now because I see that Europe didn't wake up yet.
And by that she means the threat she believes Russia poses to the whole continent. Like everyone else here, she watched Volodymyr Zelensky's combative meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump and Vice President JD Vance.
Your country's in big trouble.
The exchange and possible implications elicited anger and fear among Ukrainians.
I think it was a pure provocation from Trump and Vance. I think they knew what they were doing. They were probing Zelensky, and then he beat.
Putting the U.S.-Ukraine relationship under even more strain, further complicating the already tenuous prospects for peace. Ukrainians believe they're going to have to depend more on Europe and on countries like Canada to not only come up with a peace plan, but to find a way to help enforce it on the ground. But now the idea of peace seems far off to those living through nightly attacks. At least one person was injured in a drone strike in Zaporizhzhia late Saturday. For some in Kiev, Sunday morning was a time for prayer and reflection, a hope for calmer days ahead. I want to believe that the American administration is now past its emotional and turbulent peak, says this man. While the politics continue to play out beyond the country's borders, Ukrainians will keep trying to survive the war. Briar Stewart, CBC News, London.
Fresh off instigating that shouting match in the Oval Office, U.S. Vice President JD Vance went on vacation and received a less than warm reception.
Ski Russia because JD Vance has no friends in Vermont, but he's got lots of them in Russia.
Hundreds of protesters lining the streets in Vermont near the ski resort where Vance planned his weekend vacation. The demonstration was set up days ago, but Vance played a prominent role in the standoff with Volodymyr Zelensky, and many of the protest signs had pro-Ukrainian messages. Canada is again preparing for punishing 25% tariffs as of Tuesday, but the Trump administration is sending mixed signals, now suggesting it may not be as steep as first threatened. And as Katie Simpson tells us, the U.S. president isn't rushing to clear that up.
Ahead of what's expected to be an explosive week in the Canada-U.S. relationship, President Donald Trump returning to Washington, poised to make his final decision on tariffs. There are new suggestions. The tariff threat may not be as severe as initially promised.
That is a fluid situation. There are going to be tariffs on Tuesday on Mexico and Canada. Exactly what they are, we're going to leave that for the president and his team to negotiate.
Trump has threatened a 25% tariff on Canadian goods, a lower 10% tariff on Canadian energy, a 25% tariff on Mexico, and an additional 10% tariff on China. On Fox News, the Commerce Secretary repeatedly saying the numbers could change.
Exactly what they're going to be, I'm going to leave that for the president to decide. He's got great advisors. I'm obviously at the table with him.
While the Trump administration says these tariffs are about improving border security, the goalposts continue to shift. The latest demand, the Treasury Secretary says Canada and Mexico should impose tariffs on China.
The Mexican leadership has offered to do that. We haven't heard from the Canadians, but I think that'd be a very good start.
Trump had initially warned Americans to brace for tariff-related cost increases, but now he's dismissing concerns that his plan will make life more expensive.
It's a myth. It's a myth that's put out there by foreign countries that really don't like paying tariffs.
And Trump's allies are supporting the tariff plan, complaining that North American free trade has enabled job growth in Mexico at America's expense.
When you look at the fact that Michigan is seeing its opportunities pass by, enough is enough. The status quo is not good enough for Americans, which is why Donald Trump got elected. And frankly, even our allies have not been playing a fair game.
Whatever Trump finally decides, he will sell his decision to Americans during his major address to Congress on Tuesday night.
And Katie, this isn't the only tariff threat Canada is tracking.
Yeah, this week it's the border security tariff threat. Next week it's tariffs on steel and aluminum. And then the first week of April, it's the broader tariffs targeting all U.S. trading partners, including Canada. Trump's threats are destabilizing. It's unpredictable, and there are no signs he wants it any other way.
Katie Simpson in Washington. As Canada waits, the Prime Minister vows the country will respond if Trump follows through. JP Tasker on the uncertainty ahead and why some say this moment is about more than tariffs.
U.S. President Donald Trump could plunge the Canadian economy into a recession with the stroke of his pen on Tuesday. For border town businesses like Sunrise Greenhouses, a 25% tariff could be especially devastating.
The impact will be in the millions.
Half of the company's flowers are sold into the U.S. Now they could be priced out.
We are taking the threat very seriously and trying to be very proactive.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is promising to hit the U.S. with retaliatory tariffs the minute Trump launches his threatened trade war.
We will have a strong, unequivocal, and proportional response as Canadians expect.
But the federal government is still holding out hope its border crackdown will appease Trump's concerns about drugs and migrants. And Canada has the data on its side. The quantity of fentanyl seized at the northern border has dropped 97% in the last month alone.
Border service officers are motivated to try and find more, are motivated to try and stop anything from going to the U.S.
Still, Canadians are nervous and angry. Consider this response to the Star-Spangled Banner at a WWE Stadium show in Toronto this weekend.
We can't rely on him, and we can't rely on the Americans anymore.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says Canada should pull back from the U.S., whatever Trump does next.
We need to take back control of our economy and bring home a strong, self-reliant, and sovereign nation.
Jean Charest, now one of Trudeau's trade advisors, says Canadians need to band together like never before.
No one's going to stand up for us in the way that we have to stand up for ourselves.
Canada's head of state hasn't said a word about Trump's taunts. Trudeau is expected to meet with King Charles on Monday. The main focus of that conversation, threats to Canadian sovereignty. JP Tasker, CBC News, Ottawa.
A federal by-election for Halifax is set for next month unless a general election is triggered before then. The by-election scheduled for April 14th, but if a federal election is called, voters would instead cast their ballots then. The seat's been vacant for 6 months. Liberal MP Andy Fillmore resigned last year to run for mayor of Halifax, a race he won. The federal Liberals are expected to announce their new leader 1 week from today. Voting is underway, but as Rafi Boudjikanian shows us, some members say a new online verification process has problems.
Here we go. The Liberal Party hoped its recent debates would rev up members to vote for their new leader, members like David Ferry and his wife. They downloaded this Canada Post mobile app the party is using for what it calls a secure means to vote online. It requires uploading pictures of a passport, provincial ID, and a selfie before letting users cast a ballot. It worked for Ferry.
I downloaded it onto my device, and I was able, after a lot of hard work, to get my identification okayed by the app.
But his wife was not so lucky.
Could not get her ID accepted, could not get the app to work. So we went to the post office.
Tech support for Canada Post recommended they delete and try downloading the app again. CBC News has heard from several Liberal Party members who have encountered trouble voting. In 2013, when Justin Trudeau won the last Liberal leadership race, members voted online too, but there was no ID verification. Joe Rogge says that was a lot easier. The app rejected his picture, and he also asked for help from Canada Post.
They sent me a QR code, and when the QR code I took into post office, they tried to scan it, and it wouldn't work.
In a statement, Canada Post says its suite of services has been working as intended and there have been no issues since the service launched. And customers who cannot be verified would need to go through the Liberal Party of Canada.
We'll have situations where the staff will have to get involved and get that information squared away, and we're working diligently.
For some leadership hopefuls, the app is fodder for speeches.
Who is ready to try to battle through the Liberal Party app and vote for me?
The Liberals also say tens of thousands of members have already successfully voted. So far, only Frank Baylis's campaign has raised concerns with the voting, but others may speak up if the problems persist. Rafi Boudjikanian, CBC News, Ottawa.
The Ontario Liberal Party is keeping Bonnie Crombie on as its leader just days after she failed to win a seat in the provincial election. The party caucus and executive council unanimously voted to support her. In Thursday's election, the Liberals won 14 seats to regain party status for the first time in 7 years. Crombie was elected Liberal leader in late 2023. It's not clear yet if she'll pursue another seat in Ontario's legislature. Former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo is running for mayor of New York City. This would be a political comeback for Cuomo, who resigned from office in 2021 amid sexual harassment allegations from 11 women. Cuomo has denied the accusations. At a rally today, he advocated for a bigger police presence in the city.
We are here today because we know New York is in crisis. But we know something else. We know that we can turn this city around, and we know we will.
Cuomo's biggest challenger is the incumbent, Mayor Eric Adams, who's facing a political backlash after the Trump Justice Department moved to have federal corruption charges against him dropped. In the Middle East, Israel has suspended all aid shipments into Gaza as the first phase of its ceasefire with Hamas expired. Israeli officials want the remaining hostages released. Now, as Sasha Petrusik shows us, there's growing pressure from aid groups and mediating countries for a new deal.
In the rubble of Gaza, Palestinian Muslims mark the start of Ramadan. Finally, enough food on the table after months of war shortages. But the aid they've come to expect during the 6-week ceasefire has abruptly stopped. Trucks blocked at the border now by Israel. Enough war, says Mohammed al-Jarusha. We have a right to life. Israel says now that the first phase of the ceasefire agreement is over, it has no obligation to allow aid.
We fulfilled all our commitments until the very last day.
It says it's ready to talk.
Negotiations should be connected to a release of hostages.
Aid will start flowing, Israel says, as soon as the 59 still held start being released. About 24 of the remaining hostages are thought to be alive. During the first phase, almost 2,000 Palestinian detainees were set free in exchange for the 33 Israeli hostages. Now, Hamas says it wants to stick to the original deal, which sees all hostages freed in a second phase once Israel withdraws from Gaza and ends the war, something it's reluctant to do. But blocking aid violates international law, say UN officials, aid groups, and mediator Egypt. It's unacceptable to use aid as a weapon for collective punishment and starvation, says Foreign Minister Badr Abdelati. Hamas calls Israel's move cheap extortion. Spokesman Hazem Qassem vows Hamas won't give in.
Israel's threatened additional consequences, saying it has Washington's support for the tough approach. Still, the government here is under growing pressure from Israelis to make a deal before more hostages die in captivity. Sasha Petrusik, CBC News, Jerusalem.
The Pope missed a third straight Sunday address in St. Peter's Square, but is said to be in stable condition with pneumonia in hospital. According to the Vatican, 88-year-old Pope Francis is no longer in need of mechanical ventilation to breathe. He's been in hospital since February the 14th with a severe respiratory infection that triggered other complications. In a written statement, Francis thanked well-wishers for their prayers. We're in Hollywood tonight for the 2025 Academy Awards.
Let's say no one wants to hear what a kid wrote last month.
The top contenders, the big winners, and the can't-miss moments. Next. Plus, the push to make sick notes a thing of the past.
I'm probably spending 4 to 8 hours doing paperwork.
Why Canadian doctors want bosses to back off. And a proposal with a nice ring to it.
Wouldn't want it any other way.
We're back in 2.
There's no fight we cannot win. Just you and I defying gravity.
The wickedly good start to the 97th Annual Academy Awards in Los Angeles. The show has wrapped up, so let's go there now. Our Eli Glasner right outside the Dolby Theatre. And Eli, what did you think of the show?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty great. I enjoyed the opening. I thought it was a good high-energy way to start the show and a good way to solve a problem. The problem is you have a lot of small films that are nominated with not big audiences, so you got to play to your strengths. Wicked has been a box office monster, and so they brought Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande on stage. They opened with a melody. It was remarkable when Erivo hit those big notes at the end of Defying Gravity. Even backstage in the press room, the media were cheering. And then Conan O'Brien kept the momentum going, taking over as host. First time hosting the Oscars, but seemed very comfortable enough to have a lot of fun at the expense of many of the best pictures, poking fun at Emilia Perez and some of the tweets of that film's leading actress, making fun of the running time of The Brutalist, and really keeping the focus on the films, not so much the politics. And then the show went on, and I have to say, early on, one of the standout moments, which I suppose was political in nature, was Zoe Saldana winning for Best Supporting Actress from the movie Emilia Perez. It won 2 awards ultimately, but she did go to the podium and speak with her eyes shining with tears, talking about being the proud child of immigrant parents and saying that she was the first American of Dominican origin to accept the Academy Award and knowing that she would not be the last.
And Eli, which films won in the biggest categories?
Interestingly enough, it was Anora, and I say that because we were all wondering if there would be upsets, and in a way, it kind of played out as expected. This is an independent film. It did very well at the Cannes Film Festival. This night, it won 5 out of 6 awards that it was nominated for. That is a remarkable record for a movie with a very small budget. Samantha Kwan of Vancouver is the producer of Anora, so she was there when they first saw Mikey Madison getting into character as Anora, this sex worker, this remarkable performance. And Kwan had a note for other filmmakers there about really sticking to your guns, no matter how small the budget you're working with is. Take a look.
We made this with very little money, but all of our hearts. To all of the dreamers and the young filmmakers out there, tell the stories you want to tell. Tell the stories that move you. I promise you, you will never regret it.
Some other big winners, Brutalist won 3 awards, including cinematography and score. Adrian Brody beating out Timothée Chalamet, taking home Best Actor. And Wicked, I want to leave you with an amazing moment from Paul Tazewell. He is the costume designer of that film. Take a listen to his powerful acceptance speech.
Thank you, Academy, for this very significant honor. I'm the first Black man to receive the Costume Design Award.
Backstage talking to us, he described this as the pinnacle of his career. There were no Black men for him to follow growing up in the industry. He said this tonight was his Wizard of Oz moment.
Eli Glasner in Los Angeles, thank you so much. Canadian doctors have a message for employers that require sick notes.
They don't need to bring those germs into my office to get a note so that you can feel better.
Why some say the practice is doing more harm than good. And the real-life impact of Trump's cuts to foreign aid.
All activity suddenly stopped.
Suddenly.
CBC News is in Bangladesh, where some say medical care has vanished overnight. But first, a Canadian comic who offends with intent.
I'll probably get beat up sometime after the show.
How his style of stand-up sets him apart. The National breaks down the stories shaping our world. Next. That's the team at Firefly Aerospace celebrating the successful touchdown of its uncrewed lunar lander. Let's take a look at the view from the lander as it approached the moon. Over the next 14 days, on behalf of its client, NASA, the craft known as Blue Ghost will drill for samples, take X-ray images, and collect other data. In the search for solutions to Canada's family doctor shortage, there are renewed calls to do away with writing sick notes. As Heather Gillis shows, physicians say reducing paperwork could free up valuable time to see patients.
A minor contagious illness lasting a few days. Doctors don't want to write sick notes for that, excusing people from work or school. They're calling for them to be eliminated.
Come on, people. These are grown-ups, and if they have a cold and they are spewing germs and they're making a good call to stay home from work, they don't need to bring those germs into my office to get a note so that you can feel better about them not coming to work.
The Canadian Medical Association estimates doctors wrote 12.5 million sick notes last year. An estimated 6.5 million Canadians don't have access to primary care, and doctors say critically examining the amount of paperwork could be one small step to curing the healthcare crisis. Some provinces are making moves to curb sick notes. In Nova Scotia, employers can't demand them unless a person's been ill for more than 5 consecutive days. In Ontario and Quebec, 3 days. And that's not the only red tape keeping doctors from more patient time.
I mean, in an average week, I'm probably spending 4 to 8 hours doing paperwork, and that's between forms. So basically, forms that are disability forms, disability tax credit forms, Canada pension forms, lawyers' reports.
After putting in a full day, you're up till 10 o'clock at night finishing paperwork. People are answering.
This healthcare researcher says electronic medical records are one thing, counterintuitively increasing the administrative burden, and they could be streamlined.
You might get a PDF from a lab with lab results, but then you got to open it, click it, save it to the right patient. So, there's all these additional steps. It's not automated.
Manitoba and Nova Scotia have struck task forces to reduce doctor red tape. Quebec has passed legislation to reduce it, and many doctors say it's just a start. Heather Gillis, CBC News, St. John's.
Now let's dig deeper into the news shaping our world. For these Rohingya refugees, sudden cuts to U.S. foreign aid mean less health care and less hope.
There's fear mixed with uncertainty that it could get much worse.
But first, Sugar Sammy gets big laughs on both sides of the border.
Oh, Trump supporter.
I tend to attack everyone on every side.
The comic from Montreal has the right job at the right time to get a read on the public in this heated political moment.
I always like to get myself in trouble on stage and then figure out a way out.
I sat down with Sugar Sammy to hear what's making people laugh in both countries. One of the great things about comics is the good ones, and you're one of the good ones, have a real sense of what's going on with their audiences and across the country. And I'm curious, especially about U.S. Canada relations right now, from this side of the border. What are people feeling?
Well, the fun part is touring this country right after Trump's inauguration, and seeing these tariff wars happen as I'm touring the country. I've never seen Canada so patriotic. I've never seen the country so united, towards one goal. And even Quebec. That's how patriotic everyone, even Quebecers are feeling Canadian right now. And you feel it, it's in the air. You feel it, it's present while you're at the shows. I think you can feel the pulse of a country when you tour it, and you can see what's on everybody's minds. And I think that's something that's there. And when I joke about it, when I talk about it, the laughter is even more explosive than it was a couple of years ago when I just roast the Americans, very lightly, like, friendly jabs. But now it feels like we're actually standing on guard against them, yeah.
So you were in Calgary doing a show, and you mentioned that one of your dates coming up was in Edmonton, and people just reflexively booed, and you called them on it.
Yeah, and I said, I think we have a bigger war happening right now.
I'm going to 20 cities across the country, so spread the word. We're in Edmonton next week. And guys, we have a bigger war happening with America. Can you just get along?
Now, you've toured the United States lots as well.
Yeah.
What's it like being a Canadian comic in Trump country?
It's a lot of fun because I like to go in front of my audience and go up against the popular discourse of the time. And I think there's something fun about challenging your audience and also figuring out where everybody stands. I mean, I remember touring the U.S. last year and being able to call the election, knowing exactly how everyone was going to vote and being surprised at some of the reactions that I was getting depending on which way my comedy was leaning. Because I tend to attack everyone on every side. And I always like that. I always feel like being an equal opportunity offender is the way to figure out the pulse of a country.
Trump's not that nuts. You know who's nuts? Is his supporters sometimes. They're crazy. You run into some of them, they are crazy, right? Like, this guy's worried. He's like, some of them might be here.
You've been described as fearless as a comic, but potentially reckless. Like I saw a tape of a show you did, I think in Georgia, where somebody said, half jokingly, "We've got guns here."
There's what? Right to carry guns here. Okay. All right, cool. Look, she's like, she's like, be careful. Like, she kind of like, give me a peripheral threat. She's like, be careful, we're allowed to carry guns. Daddy, come to the punchline. Tell Uncle Buck. It's all right. They're all jokes. I'm sure Georgia has a sense of humor about itself. No? Georgia doesn't? But if you're in a comedy club, people what? People need to. I'll probably get beat up sometime after the show. I'm not sure by who. But someone, they're going to be French, Middle Eastern, or Christian. For now, it's up in the air. Look, he's like, Christians will not do that. He's like, you're good. We got you. We got you, Sugar Sammy. KKK got you.
I always like to get myself in trouble on stage and then figure out a way out, you know? It's like, and I love having that sense of fear and excitement in the audience where people are always wondering, how's he gonna get out of this one?
So there was a moment where, again, in one of these U.S. shows, one of your audience members, whose name was Idris, said, you know, hi, and you were talking to him, and then a woman in the crowd shouted out, immigrant.
Yeah.
And then you took her on.
What's your name, sir? Idris. Look at this. Beautiful. Oh, Trump supporter. Who said immigrant? Was you, miss? Sir, are you an immigrant? Yes. But you have your papers. Yes. Nice to meet you. Sir, you are a gentleman and documented.
For me, the best part about doing crowd work is being in the moment. And, you know, her shouting out what she did was obviously inappropriate. And I think had I not called that out, it would have been such a disappointment to the audience. And for me, I think it was just a natural thing because I grew up with so many cultures around me. I grew up in the most multicultural neighborhood in Quebec.
Côte-des-Neiges.
Côte-des-Neiges, yeah. So to me, it was like I was defending one of my neighbors, you know?
I love tapping into the barometer that you have for audiences, especially as you're in the midst of this tour across Canada. What about Canadian politics? Like 2 months ago, it all seemed pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah.
It was like, you know, the carbon tax and housing and inflation were the big issues.
Yeah.
What about now? Like, you've got an election coming up. Presumably that's, you know, going to be material for you.
Well, that's why I wanted to do this interview before you guys got defunded.
Too soon.
Too soon. Too soon. You're going to be fine. Comes a couple of your colleagues, but for the rest, it's going to be the Hunger Games. So no, I felt like, for me, I think just touring the country during this this tariff war that's about to happen, you can feel that that's the priority for everyone. And I feel like if this comes on, it's going to trickle down in so many ways, and it's going to affect everybody in so many ways that that's what people are thinking about the most. And you know, everybody just wants to make sure that they save their livelihood in their country right now, you know?
When I mention you to other people who know your work, honestly, the first thing they talk about is how funny you are.
Okay,
That's the headline, right? And then the other thing they talk about is that you do bilingual shows, and bilingual being French-English. But you speak two other languages, Punjabi and Hindi, right?
That's right.
But in what way does that inform your comedy, your background, your ethnic background?
Well, I think that's interesting because I feel like no matter where I go, I sort of feel like the outsider. And I think feeling like the outsider informs my comedy, but also makes me, I think, the type of writer that I am, because, you know, good comedy is great writing as well, right? So I believe that, you know, had I not grown up this way, I probably wouldn't have had as much of a knack in analyzing a lot of different cultures. I went to France, I'm definitely the outsider in France. So when I go to France, I'm the outsider. When I tour Canada, I'm that guy from Quebec. When I tour Quebec, I'm like that Anglo, you know, or that ethnic guy. So I think having that everywhere, even though it could be a lonely place to be, it's such a great space for a writer because it makes it so interesting to have a very distinctive point of view on all kinds of things in society.
Hey, je rigole, hein? Je niaise les Français, mais j'adore la France. Vous êtes mon pays arabe préféré. Look at the Arabs. Il connaît. Pardon? C'est les Arabes qui ont libéré la France. Et bientôt le Québec, Inch'Allah.
And as stand-ups, it's the most democratic art form, right? Because most of the time, you know, you'll see something in the news, and that evening you can bring it up on stage without having to filter it through, you know, a board, a committee, some producers, human resources. You're up there, you can sort of comment on things as they're happening and in real time. And I think that's the great part about being a stand-up comic, is you can really just be up there and talk about those things that everybody's afraid to talk about, be that first one to unpack these issues, you know? And I think that's one of our roles in society as comedians, is to do things like that.
So let's finish this with me asking you a little bit of advice, again, in your role as somebody who observes society. In these divided times, in your personal life, in my personal life, how do we bridge the divides, whether, you know, at a dinner party or just a group of people, when people seem so polarized? How do we deal with that?
I think the key to that is being open to dialogue, being open to conversations. I think a lot of times what happened in the last few years is people would avoid people that didn't think the same way they did. And I think the way to bridge these gaps is to welcome different conversations at the dinner table, on television, in the mainstream. And I think that's the reason why not only are people divided, but media is getting divided. So you're seeing, you know, traditional media only welcoming certain types of guests, and then, you know, these podcasts that are blowing up, only inviting these certain type of guests. And I feel like there's that show missing in Canada that could be broadcast everywhere, hosted by a comedian that unites everybody.
Excellent. You're funny, you're fearless, and you're insightful in multiple languages. It's really nice to sit down and talk with you.
No, same here, thank you. Did that work?
No. So we did that interview actually 2 weeks ago, and when we have that time gap, I often wonder, will it still be relevant? But all the things he said about politics and polarization and hearing other voices seems very relevant right now. Humanitarian agencies are pleading for support after America's sudden cuts to foreign aid.
Hopefully, the countries like USA and other countries, they will not forget the Rohingya crisis.
The toll already being felt in the world's largest refugee camp. Donald Trump's cut to foreign aid hits some of the world's most vulnerable. We track down how the sudden pause of USAID funding has ramped up suffering in the world's largest refugee camp.
Hopefully, the countries like USA and other countries, they will not forget the Rohingya crisis.
Our South Asia correspondent Salima Shivji traveled to that camp in Bangladesh to show you the impact of the initial cuts amid warnings that conditions could get much worse.
A frantic push to the front of the line. Every refugee here desperate to receive their official aid registration card. Each one recently arrived in Cox's Bazar, the world's largest refugee camp, heavily reliant on foreign donors, now suffering after the sudden loss of funding from USAID. These refugees have joined more than 1 million others from Myanmar's persecuted Muslim minority, the Rohingya, escaping here after a military crackdown that the United Nations has called a textbook case of ethnic cleansing. Sheltering in a massive tent city in neighboring Bangladesh, entrenched since 2017. A camp heaving under the strain of so many, and the added stress of waning foreign funds. Crucial aid like vaccinations to stave off rampant illness in the camp is intact, exempt from a recent executive order signed by U.S. President Donald Trump, suspending American foreign aid for 3 months. Food distribution, considered emergency funding, is also safe for now, but other vital assistance has simply vanished. Community health workers who identify illness in the camps and dispatch medicine gone. This NGO director gets the dire news from one of the refugees who's been at the camp for years. 24,000 people have lost access to those essential health workers, going door to door, giving medical treatment, and arranging ambulance trips after just one aid program was forced to shut down.
All activity suddenly stopped.
Suddenly, on the 26th of January.
26th.
Right after word came of Trump's funding freeze, a devastating blow for so many. Like Rashida, 8 months pregnant and struggling, trying to take care of her baby girl and her own health. She has no idea what she'll do when she goes into labor. The young mother will have to make her own way to a hospital far from her cramped tent. I'm worried, she tells me. They used to come see us with medicine and proper care. How will I get to the hospital now? The aid freeze has also hit 13-year-old Muhammad Khan. He can't walk because of a rare degenerative disease that has damaged his nerves. He needs his medicine, pills that ease his pain and make him a little more mobile for a disease that has no cure, his mother Yasmin said. But for 10 days, his treatment stopped. They told us not to come to the clinic, she says. My son was confined to his bed.
Many of the NGOs operating here don't want to talk about how the Trump administration has frozen humanitarian aid abroad. There's fear mixed with uncertainty that it could get much worse for these refugees, heavily dependent on American funding, which makes up more than half of all the aid money spent here.
There was the initial shock. Now try to, absorb the shock.
But the head of the Bangladesh government agency handling Rohingya refugees says it's not just the U.S. The whole world is distracted by other crises, and overall funding from all donors earmarked for the Rohingya, stateless and vulnerable, keeps dropping every year.
Hopefully, the countries like USA and other countries, they will not forget Rohingya crisis.
All he can do is hope that the U.S. will change its mind and reinstate the funds so desperately needed for a humanitarian crisis that many here feel the world has already forgotten.
A district court judge had ordered the government to release $1.5 billion in frozen USAID funding this week, noting that some of the money would pay for work that's already been carried out. But the Supreme Court stepped in to block that order as it weighs the larger questions. Coming up, a surprise engagement with a big assist from the bride-to-be's dad.
I'm feeling a little nervous with this particular job.
From the forge to her finger, the heartfelt creation next in our moment. You're looking at an engagement ring that is unlike any other. Not only was it personalized, it was made by the father of the bride. Yorkton, Saskatchewan's Bryce Coleman Sharing has been a goldsmith for more than 4 decades, and he's made a lot of rings in his time, but there's no doubt this one was special. Tonight, his creation and what followed makes our moment.
Voila. Here we are. I want to build it for my daughter. It's amazing. I love it. Power of love, right?
We went for a horseback ride. I didn't suspect anything. And then they pulled out the ring and asked me if I would marry him. My fiance went to my dad because my dad's a goldsmith.
I asked him for permission, and then I
asked him to help me start getting the ring going. I think it makes it extra special.
I'm feeling a little nervous with this particular job. You know, she's my daughter. I want to be able to make it. It's made of 18 karat yellow gold is the mount. The setting is 18 karat white gold because 18's her favorite number. And I casted this ring, set the Canadian diamond, and voila.
I just love that it's really unique and it's my dad. I don't know. Wouldn't want it any other way.
I'm very, very blessed and very grateful. This whole process, it's amazing. Being a part of my daughters, over the moon. Over the moon. Big time. That's it.
So that ring made in Yorkton, Saskatchewan, the diamond you mentioned Canadian, it's from the Northwest Territories. The gold is from a domestic company, and so as our producer Andrew pointed out, this truly was a made in Canada moment. Thank you for being with us. You can watch anywhere, anytime on the free CBC News app and subscribe to the National's YouTube channel. I'm Ian Hannah-Mansing in Vancouver. See you on News Network tomorrow at 4 Pacific Time, 7 Eastern.